let's start with the first stage or process of memory, which is encoding. Okay, remember we talked about this in terms of like your extended essay. Encoding is like you actually creating your extended essay. So encoding is our process of getting information into our brain. For example, we don't actually like open up our brain and place this picture of this puppy into our brains. We have a mental representation that our cognitive system then understands. Same thing with letters and words. We don't actually have those letters and those words in our brains. We have a representation of them. So think of encoding as like creating some sort of code that our brain is going to use to understand what this picture is. Okay, so whether it's creating a mental image or creating a word inside our head, something. Encoding is the process of getting memories into our brain. So how do we encode? Well, there's two different ways. First, some information, like for example, what you ate for lunch, is automatically processed. You don't have to do anything for that information to get encoded into your brain. Other information, new information, for instance, a friend's cell phone number or a new name, you have to pay attention to it and you have to put some effort into remembering that, right? So some things are automatic, some things are effortful. So let's talk about automatic processing first. We have a ton of information that is processed without any effort by us. For example, we process space. When you are reading a book or a textbook, you automatically encode or process where the picture is on that page. Okay? So you can like think back without actually having to physically tell yourself, oh, that picture is in the top left corner. We can go back and remember where it was. We also remember time. We unintentionally note when events take place throughout the day and what sequence they happen in. And then the frequency. We don't really need to process or keep track of how often things happen to you. So let's look at some specific examples of this. Space, where you were when an accident occurred. So you automatically process that. You don't have to like physically put that in there or like rehearse it over and over again. Time, when you woke up this morning or when a point at a show when something crazy happened, like if you watched Grey's Anatomy last night and something crazy happened, you don't like put some effort into remembering when that crazy thing happened. You're just like, oh yeah, it was about halfway through. And then frequency, how many slices of pizza you had or how many speeding tickets you received. The main point is that for automatic processing, you don't have to rehearse the info to encode it, okay? It just happens. For example, if you're trying to remember what you had for lunch, you don't like repeat yourself sitting at a table. I am in the cafeteria. It is about 12 p.m. and I'm having fish sticks and fries, right? Like, that would be weird. You would be the crazy person sitting there. So automatic processing is happening without us really trying. Effortful processing, however, is new information. Remember, this word novel means new. New information that we have to commit to memory that requires some effort. So like when you're learning a new concept, okay? So when you're learning new vocab words, or when you're learning a new history event, like you have to put some effort into remembering that. When you do that, when you put some effortful processing into remembering things, you remember it better. Our memory is more durable and it's more accessible. It's the idea that practice makes perfect. The more that you practice the new memory, the more you're going to remember it. Okay, so effortful processing comes and it lasts longer. It's a better memory. So encoding isn't always perfect. Sometimes it doesn't go well. So what are some of the effects? Well, one of the effects is the next in line effect. This effect is that when you recall or your recall is better, your memory is better for what other people say, but poor for a person just before you in line. Okay, we're going to give some examples in a second, but this is the definition. So when your recall is better for what other people say, but poor for a person just before you in line. The next is the spacing effect. We retain information better when our rehearsal is distributed over time. And then finally, the serial positioning effect. When your recall is better for first and last items, but poor for middle items on a list. Okay, so next in line effect. Let's talk about this again. What are some examples? Well, when you're in class and you're going to have to read aloud, and you know what section you're going to have to read aloud. You're more worried about what you are going to read that you're not paying attention to the people around you. Therefore, you are more likely to remember someone who reads after you or a ways before you, right? Because if you're just focusing on what you have to read, you can't really focus on the things that are happening immediately before or after you. Spacing effect. Studies show, many studies show that if you study a little bit each night, like you put in the effort each night to study, you'll remember information better than if you just cram the night before a test. This is something you should all take note of, and you should all do for your tests, especially your semester exam and that AP and IB exam at the end of the year, right? You should be studying and looking back on things a little bit each night so that you're remembering it better. This is the spacing effect. Serial positioning effect. Let's think about U.S. presidents. How many can you name? Who comes to mind? Okay, so maybe the first few U.S. presidents, maybe the last few, and then probably a couple of outliers there in the middle, right? Like Lincoln and JFK maybe. But really, you're remembering those first few, the last few. The middle are kind of, I don't really know, especially where they come in line, right? So that's the serial positioning effect. We're gonna look at that a little bit closer later on. We also do visual encoding. Mental pictures or images are really powerful when we are trying to use effortful processing, especially when we combine words with visuals. Okay, so showing the adverse effects of tanning or smoking in a picture might be more powerful than just talking about it. So showing you this picture on the left here, you looking at it, you can probably determine which twin smokes, right? By just looking at it. So we know that smoking causes an increased metabolism and will damage your skin. And so this twin probably smokes, right? That's going to last a little bit longer than me just telling you the effects. Okay, this is why when you're trying to remember things, it's always good to create pictures that go along with what you are trying to learn. So your vocab words, you should create pictures because they're going to help you remember them better. Okay, so active versus passive processing. So I've talked to quite a few of you about active versus passive studying. This is the idea here. This is what I'm talking about. It should be known that when you actively do something, you're going to remember it better than when you just passively do something. Okay? So active processing is when you're visualizing things, when you're actively trying to put it in your memory, you're actually doing something that involves the process. So, for example, you actually rewriting out notes or creating your flashcards or quizzing yourself is active, where passive is just going to be to try to memorize things, just looking over your notes. It's going to be things that you really only need to be remembered right now, okay? So active equals effortful processing, trying to connect new stuff to what's already in your brain, using your previous experiences, and you're trying to make note of what is already there. Passive is just like sitting and observing or not really like there, right? So passive, that's going to be just kind of like you're waiting for it to just kind of get into your brain through osmosis or something. Okay, so there's a bunch of different ways that we remember things. And one of the best ways for us to remember things is by use of mnemonics or mnemonic devices. Mnemonics use mainly imagery in order for us to remember things. Okay, so there's a few that we're going to talk about. The first is the method of loci. So the method of loci involves imagining moving through a familiar series of locations with the items to be remembered. So for example, if you have a list of groceries to pick up, but they aren't written down, you might try and remember them by putting one of each of those items into a different room in your home. And then visually going through each room in your home and picking up that item, okay? Then when you're at the grocery store, you're going to go back into your brain, right? And you're going to look and you're going to visually go through each room in your house, and so you can remember each of those items. That's the method of loci. The next method is called the peg word method. This is the idea that we memorize a jingle, okay? And then we associate the jingle with a list that we're trying to remember. It's even better if you can visualize the items. So for example, our jingle is 1 is bun, 2 is shoe, 3 is tree, 4 is door. And our list is lettuce, banana, cheese, tomatoes. So we would match those two things up. 1 is bun, lettuce, 2 is shoe, banana, 3 is tree, cheese, 4 is door, tomatoes, okay? Or you could make a different list, okay? Then finally, the link method. This involves forming a mental image of items to be remembered in a way that links them together. So if you know that you need a list of groceries, you could show a bucket of popcorn with an umbrella kind of sticking out of the top. Maybe it's one of those paper umbrellas, and it's sitting underneath a light. And then on it, there is a picture of a pen that is drawn on it, and some toothpaste just is randomly sitting on top of the popcorn, right? Like if you picture that image, that's the link method, kind of linking all of them together. Another way to remember things is by chunking. We've talked about this already in our first video, but this is organizing things into either familiar units or more manageable units, okay? So if you try to remember this number on the right, I'm just going to let you look at it. You can remember all of those numbers. Can you remember them? Probably not so well, right? Like if you close your eyes and you try and remember them right now, you're not going to get them. However, if we chunk them, we're going to recall them better. So 1776, 1492, 1812, and 1941. Some pretty big events in American history, right? Now you can probably remember all of those numbers. We tend to do that, right? I've always been told to try and remember things like a phone number. It makes things a little bit easier. You guys don't have to know phone numbers, so it might be something different for you. But that's the idea of chunking, putting things into either familiar or more manageable units. Acronyms are another great way to chunk information, okay? So homes, we can use homes to remember the Great Lakes. PEMDAS, we've all probably heard of that, right? The order of operations, and then Roy G. Biv, our colors. Sometimes we also put new words to things, like, for example, PEMDAS. I've always heard this as please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, so that we can remember those order of operations.